We're back with another episode on Special Operations Aviation. Today, Brian Casmo Harris interviews MH6 Little Bird pilot Gabe Saldana about the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. This is authentic.
We continue our journey to examine Special Operations Aviation, and in particular the 160th Night Stalkers, this time with a longtime friend, Gabe Saldana. Gabe retired as an MH6 Little Bird pilot from the 1st Battalion 160th. Gabe and I served together both as flight school students in 2003 to 2004, and also as OH-58 Delta pilots in 1st Squadron 17th Cav 82nd Airborne Division. You and I have known each other since 2003?
Yeah, it's been 2003.
That's when we started school. It's really hard to believe that.
Yeah, coming up. Well, yeah, I guess it's been 20 years now. It's
20 years.
We're going on it.
Yeah, it'll be. I think we started in August of 2003, August, September timeframe.
Yeah.
In fact, I've got. Well, here, right behind me, I've got my Nickel Ride poster or whatever, the little plaque. I don't remember if you got that.
Yep.
And it says Nickel Ride 1 October.
That sounds about right. I was thinking October or something like that.
So that means we would have started September, because I think the Nickel Ride was about 2 or 3 weeks into school. So it's been a long time. It's been several minutes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, we've been talking about getting together for quite some time, so I appreciate you doing this. And again, like I talked to you before we started recording, focus here is to talk about Special Operations Aviation. And I know you and I flew OH-58 Deltas together. We actually finished school together, then went to Fort Bragg together. And then what? You went to Alaska, I think, after?
I did, yeah. After we got back from, I think it was our second deployment. Yeah. Pretty much right after I got back, I started packing up and headed up to Alaska to get ready to deploy again.
Yeah. And then at some point you had this wild, insane idea, completely counter to everything you'd been taught and led to understand and hold true as an OH-58 Delta pilot to then go to 160th. So you decided to go to 160th. Tell us about that decision making. Like what caused you to want to do that?
It was. I think Bragg was a big part of it. Believe it or not, when I got up to Alaska, you always hear people say, or at least once you're at Bragg, that it's different. You have that camaraderie, the team spirit's a little bit different than everywhere else. And of course, that was my first Army experience. I was like, okay, that's just what people say. Well, I found out, it pretty much is like that. I got to Alaska. Not to say they weren't a good unit. It was a good unit. It just wasn't the same,
Right.
So did that trip and came back. And while I was on that trip, I was like, I met it was actually a Black Hawk maintenance guy. And he came to recover an aircraft, and we got to eat breakfast, and we were just talking. And it shed some light on me that, the group of guys that we always thought were, as we were on our deployments, like, oh, those guys are assholes, why would anybody want to go over there? They just, they think they're better than everybody else. He made me see that they're, not everybody's like that.
Right.
And just the way he talked about the unit, I was like, man, it sounds like a good place to be. And the people sounded good.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm all basing this off of one conversation, but I was like, well, I haven't had any conversations before that with anybody. So it was just all hearsay or whatnot.
Right.
So at that point, I kind of looked into a little bit more, and I tried to find some people who say they've gone or, went and assessed or whatnot. And I figured, well, you know what? I want to give it a whirl. I kind of want to get back to some place to where I know I can stay if I get there. And I was ready for a change in basically it's a platform mission set. So I thought I'd give it a whirl.
Yeah, I think what you're saying too about the camaraderie, I've had this conversation with people as well. Like, and I don't know if it's Bragg. I don't know if it's the time period. I don't know if it's the people, but I share the same thoughts with you. Like, I never experienced the same sort of camaraderie, teamwork, and focus, quite frankly, that I did when I was at Bragg. And I just don't know, like, if it had anything to do with just the time period of when this was happening, because we got there, 2004. And I think I left in 2011. I can't remember. I think you left after me or around the same time,
Right.
but yeah, so I can understand that, and then going somewhere else, because I had the same feelings when I went to Hood, where I was just like, this just isn't the same. Like I don't feel like we're training the same level. I felt like at Bragg we were constantly doing something, and it wasn't just with ourselves. We were constantly working for guys on the ground and things like that. And then of course, being at Bragg, you're going to be exposed to special operations with the Hardy Boys down the road, and all the special forces groups and stuff that were here. So yeah, it makes sense. So when you made this decision, did you have an idea of what you wanted to fly when you got there, or you just wanted to go there?
So yeah, I mean, believe it or not, so one of the crew chiefs that we had up there, he was a crew chief at one time, the regiment there, and so I kind of picked his brain as best I could. Hey, what is the mission sets of each one? What is each company like? Do you have an opinion?
Yeah.
So we had talks about that. So in my head, I quite honestly, I didn't want to fly anything big. With the 58, I was like, man, I like the feel of a single engine aircraft, putting it on and going flying.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to keep that. So obviously, instant in my head, I was like, I'm going to see if I can get a little bird. Didn't really matter, gun or lift, but that was going to be my choice. If I could put one down. And of course, I was like, well, I'll take what I can get regardless, but if I have a choice, that's what I wanted. So, when I looked into it and through the application process, I put that and crossed my fingers. And of course, you find out more as you get down there. And looking back, I'm glad I stick with a little bird. There are their advanced airframes are nice and they have a lot of features in them. But I think it's also the people. Not to say that any of the people are better or worse in each company, right. But there's a lot of guys that we all knew that were in the same company. So it's kind of the same mindset once again.
Yeah. And you had mentioned earlier, our sort of view of those guys when we were, regular quote unquote conventional dudes, it was like, oh, these guys are just assholes. And of course there were those moments where you did have interactions with them that were less than pleasant in some cases. But I think having talked to several people now from that community, it seems like there was a culture shift over the years. Like maybe early on, there was a lot of that sort of like eat your own, eat your young type stuff and treat everyone like crap. And then as you got more of an influx of other people, that maybe that sort of softened or at least changed or something. So, but it's always different too when you're on the opposite side of the fence, how things look. Yeah. And then you realize that, it's sometimes it's just miscommunications and misunderstandings. It's not really it's a funny thing. Like I think about my experience, 22 years in the Army, I met very few assholes. Like if you really think about it, like from a personal level, I met a lot of people that I don't like. I met a lot of people that I would never want to work with again. But like, well, I won't say his name, but there's an individual that I know and that from our time at Fort Bragg that was an absolute terror at work. But then you talk to him outside, he was like a totally good dude, So it's like a lot of times it's environment, it's there's some context and things. So I think some of those run-ins that maybe we had, or at least perceived run-ins that we had, were just sort of figments of our imagination, a little bit of miscommunication. But at the same time, there are certainly some assholes here and there.
Yeah, and part of it probably was that, persona they thought they had to live up to, or maybe that's, the image they wanted to have. But and it's exactly that. I think, once you know the individuals on a personal level or started to interact with them,
right?
It's not who they were, that image isn't them.
Yeah, exactly. So, That's right. It's not who they are personally. So you apply, I mean, just briefly, like, is it a pretty lengthy application process for those guys? I imagine there's a lot of paperwork.
And of course, you got to remember, I did this years and years ago, so I'm sure it's different now. But when I did it, it was, hey, get on the internet, print out a form, and it was an application for an application. So you filled it out, and it asked for general, hours, NVG time, things like that. And you submit it. And at that point, it would reply back with either, hey, here's an application, or, hey, you don't have the experience we want, get some more and try again. Mm-hmm. So, there's a couple of waiting periods, and you wait. And so I got the application. So I was like, oh, well, okay, I passed step one, apparently. Filled that out. And that's where they do ask, you mentioned, platforms. And it says, hey, in preference, what would you like to fly? And then also in preference, where would you like to live? And it gives you, the bases. Submitted that and got, hey, you've been selected to come assess. Here's your dates. And you show up and you go through that assessment process. And part of that is, hey, we can offer you this platform, but if you want to live here, we can offer you this location, but you'll fly this. And, there's everything's a test once you get there, for the assessment. I mean, the whole big thing is just a roller coaster ride of self-doubt. You get there. And so at that point you're like, I don't care about what I fly. I don't care about, where I go. You're just trying to pass, because nobody wants to fail, especially with, guys like me, you, everybody else we know. You want to be successful when you get there, and you're going to do whatever it takes to pass that thing. Yeah. So it was, I just remember at one point they said, hey, we're going to give you 47s. And I was just like, okay. Because at that point I was just, I felt like I'd been mentally beat by that point. So I was like, all right, whatever. Okay. Yeah, I'll fly a 47, and afterwards I'm like, did I just say I'd fly a 47? I'm like, what the hell? So, but of course I ended up in the Little Bird. So it worked out.
Yeah. Talk us through, well, first of all, I'll tell you what, talk us through the construct of the 160th, just in general terms, because you're talking about there's different bases, there's different platforms. So just give us kind of an overview of the 160th.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing, unusual that you can't find like off Wikipedia or something, but it's,
sure.
You got your Hawks, your 47s, and of course your Little Bird platform. And everybody, we always crack up because, most guys, when I talk to them, they're like, hey, yeah, what did you used to fly? And I'm like, I was in the Army, flew the MD 500 Little Bird. And they're like, oh, I don't know what that is. And as soon as you say, have you ever played Call of Duty? And they're like, yeah. Oh, that little one? You're like, yeah, that one. Oh, okay. So everybody knows it from the video game, or Black Hawk now. And then, of course, base-wise, you have, up in Washington State, and then Tennessee and Georgia. And that's it. And, of course, you do a lot of traveling. So I think that's probably one of the, I don't know, I at times I enjoyed it and at times I kind of didn't. But you do get to travel a lot, but you're also home. And they had that, that work hard, play hard mentality. And they were very family oriented. And that was a plus to it. When you got back, if you were home, you were home. They wanted you to get out of there and go home. Vice, you were in places, in the past where, if we didn't have anything going on, they wanted you to look busy, the busy work, go do something, go shred some papers or stock the fridge, something like that. And I think that was a real good thing. They understood that it was stressful on you and your family, and they wanted you to have that family time.
Right.
So
what, how was the assessment program? Like I know you said everything was a test. I mean, give us kind of a general idea. What was assessment like? What'd you have to do?
So it varies in length, and I'll say that much, just depending on, I guess, the individual. So, there's no specific, I would say, set days that they're going to give you. And like I mentioned before, in my experience or my opinion, everything is, the individual is harder on themselves, and you're your worst enemy during that.
Yeah.
So, you'll show up, they fly in, you go TDY from your unit, and, it's a very welcoming end dock, I guess you would say. The person who meets you or greets you there will sit you down, goes through a series of paperwork, and, at that point, kind of gives you your schedule and says, hey, this is what your week may or may not look like. But in general, you have a general time flow, and then sends you on your way. And there's really nobody there to hold your hand, guide you through anything. They say, hey, this is where you need to be. And then at that point, you just get a repetitive number of times to be somewhere. So they'll either give you also what you're going to be flying in for your assessment. So there's a flying piece. There's a physical piece or aspect of it. And then, of course, there's a board that you'll go through. All of them, I would say everybody makes or breaks themselves on all those pieces.
Yeah.
And, the motto, Night Stalkers Don't Quit. If there's any inclination of you wanting to do that, you're pretty much going to be done in there.
So it's a lot of mental tests, because they're probably testing you on things that they already know you're going to fail at or not do well at.
I wouldn't say necessarily you're going to fail, but what, I would say is, even if you fail, they're going to see what you do.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's just the mentality. And like I said, a lot of this stuff was tailored. I'm trying to think of the best way to word it. There's no right or wrong, you know.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't do something correctly, it's what did you do to continue?
Right.
Or did you continue? You know, so and that's everything they look at.
How did you emotionally deal with that adversity?
Yep.
Because they know that you're in there beating yourself up because you don't want to fail. If for no other reason, you don't want to go back to your unit and say that I didn't make it. And now the pressure's on, and are you going to crack? How are you going to cope with that stuff? Because I think I remember talking to you after you first got there, and you talked about the fact that you were flying around in the MH6, and you'd never flown one before.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
and
they're
like, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was laughing because, so when I did mine, I'm flying around in this aircraft, and I had, like you said, no clue where anything was on this thing. And, when's the last time you and I flew with a paper map? I had a paper map. And I'm thinking, man, I may have had one of these in flight school. I remember there was a course. I'm pretty sure there was, I'm trying to remember how to use all this stuff. And I was supposed to find this target. And, it's pitch black out there. You can't see crap. It's all farmland. And I'm like, man, I have no idea where I'm at. And they don't, you don't have GPS. You don't have nothing.
Yeah.
And I could have swore wherever this target was that I was supposed to land at was there. And we must have went by. I kept turn around. They're like, man, you've already missed it. I'm like, I don't care. I'm finding this thing. So we're just zigzagging back and forth. And so I was in the general area. I just couldn't see it, like right in there. And I was, but I think that's one of the things they look at is, are you just going to give up? Are you going to quit? Right. Are you going to be done? Like, okay, well, I can't find it. Let's just leave. Well, if somebody's life is dependent on you to get there.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Because at that point you're pulling like flight lead duties, but you don't know, like you're not qualified to do what you're trying to do necessarily. And so they know that. And I guess that's the point I'm making is like, yeah, they're looking to see how do you react to this high stress situation, but they don't expect you to fly out there and land on the exact X the first time. I mean, if you did, that's great, but
yeah, they say there may be guys that go out and do it. I don't know, but
I'm sure there are.
But and then on top of that, now I'm already like, mentally, I'm like, well, I already screwed this up. I'm a no-go, Yeah. So he's like, hey, here's the controls. I want you to fly us back in formation. And I'm like, okay. So I grab it. No, once again, nothing about this aircraft. Didn't know there was a trim or anything like that. So I'm fighting this aircraft all the way home, to the point where I feel like I'm about to go into muscle failure. And in my head, I'm thinking, man, these guys must really work out. They're like, man, these got to have some super good strength, stamina, something, because I am smoked. And I'm like, I don't even know if I want to do this. Like, I couldn't fly an aircraft like this for 2 or 3 hours.
Right.
And of course, come to find out, if I had moved that little coolie hat up top and trimmed it out just fine, things would have been a lot easier. But they don't tell you anything. They don't share that information. And of course, I didn't ask because I don't know any better. So I was just like, well.
Yeah. Well, especially coming from the 58, you would have probably never thought of that. I never would have thought about it.
Yeah, and you get in it and it's already dark. You're like,
sure. It's the worst. I hate that. There's something I just abhor about getting into the aircraft when it's dark. It doesn't matter how experienced I am in that aircraft. I just don't like that feeling.
Yep.
I guess in that world you got to get used to it. But yeah, I never enjoyed that. Was it already running? That's the worst.
I'm trying to remember.
Probably not. They probably started with you in there.
No, I think it was off.
Okay.
Because I remember. So another little funny tidbit when I look back on it, and it got brought up, was the use of a checklist afterwards. But the guy I was flying with decided to try to take off, and he pulls up on the collective, and the rotor just dropped. So we're sitting there, and I just hear, I'm like, what the hell? And he lowers the collective down, and I was like, I just remember looking at him. At that point, I was kind of like, I said, well, that's not good. And he just looked at me and gave me, I could just see under his goggles, the nastiest look. And I guess I realized at that point he didn't roll the throttle up, so he rolled it up.
So he's mean mugging you because you called him out on his stupid.
So I'm like, oh, I just started this flight off bad because now we're still going flying, and he's just like, dick.
Yeah. That's awesome. Were they contractors or were they like green suiters?
No, they're green suiters. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was definitely an interesting experience because, you get done with that flight and, you drag yourself out of the cockpit and you're just like, you know what? I just wasted everybody's time. In my head, that's what I'm thinking. Everybody has their different, different thought process, but mine was I just wasted everybody's time. I came out here thinking, honestly, I didn't know what to expect or what to think. But after that, I was just like, well, I guess I'm going to be get told to pack my crap up and go home. So,
yeah.
But walk off, and then of course you had to get ready for another portion of the event for the next day, and you're up all night doing that. And it really does, like I said, it's mental, and it's just like you start to question, like, was I prepared? What could I have done to be more prepared? And there's really nothing you can do because you don't know what to expect.
Yeah, but you never believe yourself when you say that either. Like you always,
no, you don't.
You always think like, I could have done this. And it's like, well, yeah, if you could have added 2 more hours to the day, but you never think those terms.
Yeah, and that's all part of it, because once you look back at it and you think, man, there wasn't enough time to do what they wanted.
Yeah, almost by design.
So now how do you prioritize? What's the most important thing?
Mm-hmm. Right. So you get told that you're going to be accepted. Do they tell you there during the assessment, or they get back to you later?
No. So they tell you after you while you're in there for your board.
Okay. And they tell you what you're going to fly and where you're going to be and all that stuff.
Well, they tell you, but they also tell you with a caveat that it could change when you come back to start Green Platoon.
Okay.
That it's always the needs of the regiment. So if it changes, they'll let you know.
All right.
But yeah, so I went in, had the board, and that process was very interesting. I went there as a senior 3, and you get comfortable talking to individuals. And you knew me from back anyways. I was kind of had a hard time always saying sir and all this stuff. And so when the colonel asked me questions, I was just like yes, no. So I got screamed at about that. And then there's a lot of yelling because they want you to be as uncomfortable as possible. So and they do a really good job at it. So that gets done. And they tell me to wait outside, and instantly I'm already like, well, yeah, this is because by the time they get done with you, you're just like, you feel like you're the worst person in the world, and that you shouldn't have even went. But I don't know. In my head, I was like, man, I know I'm better than this, but I feel like I'm absolutely sure I failed this thing.
Because you're not seeing anyone else's experience, right? I mean, so so for all you know, they're all doing just peachy and no one's yelling at them and they're landing where they're supposed to land and everything, but you're just looking back at your own failures.
Yeah, you only see you don't you have no peers around, even though there's multiple people there doing the same thing. You have no a basis for how you're doing.
Are you able to talk to the other applicants?
I guess you could if you wanted to. But I mean, you're so busy in your day that you never overlap. Or at least I don't recall, or you might see somebody just say, hey, and just kind of smile and hope you're doing good, but you're constantly going.
I asked because I assessed for a different organization years and years ago, and I think there was like 12 of us, and we were told straight out, you are not allowed to talk to anyone. And they basically intimated that the barracks area was bugged, which it probably wasn't, but you basically signed a form saying that you were willing to be listened in on or something. Yeah. So your assumption was that you were essentially bugged. And I tell you that really affected you because you're there I think we were there for a week or so. And, and you're showering and shaving and doing all the stuff around other people, but you're just not allowed to talk to them at all. And so you have no idea, just same thing. It's like you have no idea what their experience was with something, and so then you're second guessing yourself, like, oh, I probably botched that up, but you have no idea if everyone else botched it. So yeah, those are kind of psychological games. But what you're saying is everyone's just too busy anyway that you're just not able to interact from a timing standpoint.
Yeah, that's and it's I don't know, a lot of I don't know. For me, it was just a bunch of self-doubt. Sure. But I guess you have to either push through it. And you're like, well, I know I can do this. I know I can do everything they're asking of me.
Right.
And a lot of it is, and you start to question, it's like, well, I don't know how to do that, or I haven't done this before.
Yeah.
So you're kind of making it up as you go and testing just your own abilities. And And I think for me too, the other outcome to all of it was I kept telling myself, what's the worst that's going to happen? I go back, well, at the time I thought I'd go back to 58s, but of course then right afterwards, we all found out the 58 went away. So,
yeah,
but that's all I kept thinking. And then I was like, well, but the biggest piece is you don't want to fail it. So,
right. Yeah. We're not a community or culture that accepts failure. We don't like
right.
that.
And and that's, and that, so at that point at that board, they sent me out and they, have a seat outside. I go sit outside and in my head, I'm already preparing myself to get told, hey, come back. You're going to need to come back or we don't want to see you again. Like, don't.
Right.
Fine.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, they call me back in, I have a seat. And to this day, I still don't remember really what was said. Basically it was like in my head, I heard you're just a horrible pilot. We don't even know why you're in the Army flying. You can't even do the basics, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I hear congratulations, you're accepted. And all I remember was saying thank you. And I sat there still at attention in my chair and they all get up and they start laughing and they're like, you're good, man.
And these are the same dudes that have been yelling at you and stuff.
Yeah. And I was sitting there and then finally one of them had to get up and says, stand up. You're fine, man. It's over. And I'm like, what? And he's like, you've been accepted. And I was like, it finally slowly started clicking and I'm like, holy crap. So,
yeah.
But it lets you see that, I guess it puts your brain in a position that you never thought you kind of put yourself in. And everybody does. I mean, we've all been in these weird scenarios, but like I said, the self-doubt and is the hardest thing. And I think that's where I saw a lot of guys so once I finished that, I came back and I worked before I started Green Platoon in that office. And I saw a lot of guys that failed wasn't because of their lack of abilities or anything. Because everybody can be trained, for the most part, right. 95% of the people can be trained. It's just you giving up on yourself. And that's what failed a lot of people, I would say.
Okay. Well, let's fast forward. You've been selected. I know you come back and go through Green Platoon, which I'm going to save that for a different discussion. But now you're at the unit. I believe it was Alpha Company, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So Alpha 1st Battalion 160th is the lift Little Bird. So there's, why don't you tell us about 1st Battalion of 160th?
So I really don't know how to start off with that. I guess you would say, they pride themselves as being, tip of the spear. Mm-hmm. So if you like being gone a lot, you like doing a lot of the hard hitting, that's the battalion to be in. Not to say the other ones don't do theirs, but everybody is kind of tailored to their own little mission sets, and theirs is a very unique one. So I probably just leave it at that. But
yours is the team that plays with all the other teams. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Lots of various customers of various flavors and uniform types.
Baskin Robbins, straight out the.
That's right. But as far as airframes, how is the breakdown of the battalion with the airframes? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, you have your lift side, just like we discussed, Little Bird in A1. B1 was your Little Bird gun, and the rest were your 60s or your Blackhawks. Okay. And of course, in the old dynamic we used to hear things, A and B co never used to talk to each other, and they always, you're young over on this one, and if you try to yell at this guy and you're not in this company, that you mentioned that dynamic and that changing over the years, and that definitely did change. I think we were at that point when we got there, or when I got there. A little bit of when you show up and you've known people from your previous life, and you see them and they don't talk to you initially, and they don't, you go on a trip and you're like, hey man, what's up? And they just kind of look at you. And you're like, man, what is going on? And then you pull them aside and you kind of have these discussions like, hey man, you're the new guy. We're not supposed to be doing this. We're not supposed to do that. Yeah, dude, I've known you for like 5 years. Right. Now you're not going to talk to me. And it's like, well, we'll get in trouble. And that dynamic started breaking through the years after I got there. Some of the other guys got there, and And even in BCO, where guys would never talk, like I would never go to ACO and talk to a BCO guy.
Right.
It just wasn't done. And now, they were going back and forth and having these discussions because we'd all been deployed together. We'd all, flown, 58s together or something like that. So,
yeah. So you think maybe the constant deployment cycle of OIF maybe help break down some of those barriers, because and it's not to say that those guys weren't doing anything in the 90s, because they were, but it wasn't nearly the tempo that it is now. And so when you're sort of just in a at home mode, you can have those walls and barriers, but now when you're being forced to work together outside the home quite a bit, I mean, it lends itself to, we should probably talk about this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, another big, what's funny is when you get there, when you finish Green Platoon, you're what they call a BMQ for essentially up to 2 years. You have 2 years to qualify or get fully mission qualified. So in my class, there was 4 of us. One ended up getting canned, unfortunately, out of Green Platoon. And then the second guy, he had an interesting, it just didn't work out for him, and they let him go. And it was me and another guy that made FMQ out of our class. So out of the 4, 2 of us made FMQ. And we used to always sit there and tell ourselves, like, man, because initially they would just treat you like crap, like you're not literally treat you like crap, but just, when you're flying, you're never doing it right. When you do a product, you never do it right. Right. You're repeatedly making things over and over again. And you're like, man, why am I doing this to myself? Like I said, I was already 18 years in.
Right.
And it kind of gives you a little bit of like, man, do I really want to be here? Is it worth doing? And they try to stress you out to the maximum. But what made it so hard was you didn't get stressed. You kind of got annoyed at that point.
Yeah.
And we talked about it was, guys like you and I had been deployed. I'd already been deployed 3 times, 3 years in a combat deployment. Right. You can't, what you're stressing, trying to do or put on a stress level isn't something that is going to stress us out anymore.
Yeah. You're not trying to stress out a 1994 era new guy who hasn't really done anything. He missed Desert Storm and he hasn't deployed, Yeah. You're trying to stress out a kid who's never had a tough day in his life versus trying to stress out a guy who's already seen buddies die, who's already put warheads on foreheads, who's done things. Yeah. So I can see that.
And that's what was kind of, so they, no matter what you knew or what your background was, they still had that mentality that you're someone who hasn't seen things. And so it would kind of went down that road initially. Mm-hmm. And what was nice though, is once we kind of made, got senior in there, it was, hey, let's start listening to some of these guys who were, they've all got combat experience. They've all either had it on the ground, then became pilots, because the war has been going on for so long. And I think it started developing, the camaraderie there developed a little bit better. And some will say it still did, because when you're the new guy and you're the BMQ stocking the fridge there and sweeping floors, because you still had your daily duties, we all had our gripes, but it was the treatment of the individual that was the worst of it. So,
right. Well, the thing about Iraq and Afghanistan, and you can attest to this as a 58 guy, is things that were solely in the realm of 160th weren't necessarily there during OIF and OEF because there was too much work to go around. And so it wasn't uncommon as a 58 guy, it wasn't uncommon as a 64 guy to be doing some of the same stuff. Obviously not necessarily on the lift side, but I mean, from the gun side, definitely doing a lot of the same kind of support. It may not be as the high intensity situations that, you might leverage like the Bravo Company guys or whatever. But, I'm sure you worked with a ton of special operations dudes as a 58 guy, because I know I did. Mm-hmm. And so now, you're coming in and you've got guys who have a little bit of experience. Whereas if you'd fast, or rewinded, 10 or 15 years, a new guy would have no experience with that whatsoever. And so, you're sort of breaking them down. I remember talking to you. I went up to Campbell and you and I were going to try to get together and have lunch, but timing didn't work out. But I remember you telling me like why you couldn't meet one day, because you were like, well, I'm cleaning out a Connex. And I remember like laughing because I was like, dude, you were a senior instructor pilot. You're a CW3. You were like the chief, senior pilot at your last unit. I was like, you're cleaning out a Connex, but it goes back to what you're saying is like, it's essentially starting over.
Yeah.
Is what's happened. It's like being a Woj again, a warrant officer junior grade, for those who don't know, where guys are coming in out of flight school. They have no experience whatsoever in aviation. And they get treated kind of crappy, depending on, the unit, the personalities and stuff. But, you're stocking the fridge, you're making coffee, you're sweeping and stuff. But I mean, all the things you described, it's being a Woj again. You're just starting all over.
Man, I'll tell you, so an image burned in my mind. I'm getting ready to get out. I'm doing my last trip out in Virginia. And I'm walking to the meeting, and I see a guy out there, and it's cold, it's raining, and he's at the burn barrel, and he's throwing, papers and burning them. And I'm looking at him like, man, I don't recognize this guy. So I walk up to him, I'm like, how's it going, man? And he's like, oh, pretty good. And I look, and he's in uniform, and he's got W5 on his W5 on his chest, and I'm like, what? You out here burning trash? He's like, yeah. I'm like, who are you? He's like, oh, I'm more than you BMQs. And I just shook my head.
What?
This guy, W5, he came and assessed, I guess, as a senior 4, but made 5 as he showed up. And he's out there burning trash. And I said, man, you're a better man than me. He just started laughing. He's like, yeah, I'm kind of second guessing this. And I said, we all do it, dude.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating though, because it does go to show that it's less about rank and it's more about competency or at least who you are in the unit and stuff.
Yeah.
Because you could see a different unit like, oh, a W5 show up. He may not know his ass from a hole in the ground, but he's like, oh, he's a W5. We're going to make sure he's taken care of. Yeah. So that's interesting. Tell us about the MH6.
Well, that thing is a nice little hot rod. It's tough. I want to say it's probably my favorite aircraft, but I only say that with the addition of, I should say, non-armed aircraft. So love the 58, love the weaponry that was on it and how we utilized it. And the same could be said for the Little Bird. Its mission and what we did with it and where you could put it, how you could fly it was perfect for the mission they had it for. I know we all used to joke around and saying like, man, wish we could get a Little Bird and do the scout mission like they did in Vietnam and all that stuff with it. Probably could have been done, but the hours that we flew that 58 on patrol would have wore guys out if you did that in a Little Bird platform, in a combat profile, I would say.
Is that because of what you described as far as like how it's flown? Yeah,
I would say, just the lack of hydraulics in that aircraft and in those, like if you were flying it in a gun run or gunfight for, what we do, some of our flights were 4-6 hours. I know I did a 10-hour day in Iraq one time.
Yeah, I remember that day.
Yeah, I mean, it's unreal. I mean, so if you would have been in that thing, it could be done. Don't get me wrong, but you would just be severely worn out, I think.
Right.
We had the luxury of diving and having hydraulics and turning that aircraft out, and you might mush through, but these, no hydraulic aircraft, you dive it and you try to pull through and turn, your collective feels like a 60-pound weight as you're pulling up on it. So, that'll put some wear and tear on a guy, but,
right. So what was the mission though of Alpha Company? Like what did you guys focus on? Obviously it's a lift aircraft. I mean, how much could it lift? How many people? I mean, describe that.
Yeah. So it's, of course, a lightweight aircraft, easily transportable. Typically, we're putting the customer down in the X, which is, so if you need to put somebody down at the doorstep, you're putting them at a doorstep. Now, payload wise, I mean, it's going to vary, of course, this is, on fuel and, how far you need to go and how many guys you want me to get there.
Sure.
But typically you might see, 2, 3, 4 guys on it. You can carry more, but at that point, it's literally probably like a short hop, So I enjoyed it. As far as putting it in the tight spots, I think that challenge was always fun. We landed some 58s and we all thought it was pretty cool if we could put it in, to a tight confined area or something like that.
Yeah.
But flying through some streets and landing on a rooftop or to a bridge wing of a ship at night when you can't see anything. It's kind of, we all like that adrenaline rush, and it definitely gives you when it fills that void. So,
yeah. When you're home and you're training, like to get to that level of proficiency, I mean, how often were you guys flying, and what were you doing typically when you were flying? Was it just a ton of landings, or was it a lot of navigation? Like, what'd you guys do?
Yeah. So kind of what we mentioned earlier, that we're gone. You're gone a lot. And you see a lot of these trainings. So a lot of the training you can do either locally, you go out, just like we did in the 58, we go out to the range. We have training sites, mount sites that we use. You can land at rooftops and to the streets and stuff like that. Or if you just get on YouTube and you always see all the, I think their most recent one was Los Angeles, I think you saw. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah, I think so.
So they'll do, realistic training in some of these cities. And they put the information out. It goes out public. Most people don't read the flyers, don't read the messages, and then of course get all terrified when something goes on. They think we're coming to take their guns or something.
It's martial law.
Martial law. There you go. Yeah, and but that's the kind of training they're doing, and it gives them the ability to get that exactly how it's labeled, realistic urban training. So
yeah. Did you guys practice shooting from the cockpit like we had to do in a 58?
I don't think I ever did.
No.
I know some guys did, but I don't think I ever shot out of the aircraft.
I mean, I guess to be fair, we never practiced either. We just did it. You know what I mean? I was thinking about that the other day. Like I don't remember ever practicing that. I think there was a range one time at Bragg when I was gone that guys did it. Maybe you were there.
I think we did one, because I remember there was like a weird pattern we had to do with some Connexes that had targets or something on it. And but you couldn't tell if you were hitting anything. But the most of it you got was while you're deployed, hey, let's go out and start shooting. So
yeah, it's easier to get approval trying to do it.
But we never, not to say that I don't think they did it. It's just, I never practiced.
It wasn't a priority of training. Yeah. Okay. I would just think that I guess I'm surprised to hear that, honestly, just thinking about the type of environments that you might be. I mean, you're talking about landing guys on rooftops, or I've seen pictures of, landing with, the skid on the railing of a balcony, talking to a mutual friend of ours that was there at the unit, may still be there, talking about doing stuff like that. So I was wondering,
when you're doing that kind of stuff, so you're focused, as the pilot, or both pilots, pilot, co-pilot in there, your job is to fly.
Yeah.
And then when you're on essentially short final, both of you are on the controls. And that's just in case if one of you gets hit, if one of you loses sight of the LZ, anything, the other person's ready to take control and continue with that infill.
Yeah, it's true.
So even if you wanted to try to do anything, plus you got, typically you got the baddest dudes in the world with you anyway. So it's not like you're going to hit something they're not going to hit. So
yeah, that's true. You got bearded bubbas hanging off the side. But they're 90 pounds of gear on their rifle. Yeah.
But, it's I don't know. I kind of would have liked to try it though, just to see.
Yeah, I guess the more I think about it, that I can see why it wouldn't be a deal. I know I talked to what's his name? Greg. I don't know if you knew Greg Coker. He may have been before your time, but he was a gun guy, Bravo Company guy. He wrote a book, but he had talked about that, like that they definitely did some rifle shooting from the cockpit there. But I guess that makes a lot more sense. You were talking about doing it like during breaking away, off the target, having to do it quite a bit. But
those guys over there probably did a lot more in BCO.
Sure.
Yeah, we didn't. We never. I shouldn't say never. I never personally messed with it or did it. So
yeah. If you're in the unit and let's say you're just not gelling with what you're doing, like for whatever reason, I don't like the MH6. I don't want to fly it, or I'm not good at this, or I don't. Is there a capability to move within the unit to go fly Blackhawks or Chinooks or something like that? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, there's a couple guys that have done that. So you can either move between. We've seen guys go from from Little Bird to Little Bird, from the lift side to the gun side. Which, like I said, by that point, most of the guys were interacting fairly well. So, it was, that wasn't a big transition. And then there was I want to say maybe one that went, I'm trying to think now, they went to the Hawk. So if you end up I ended up leaving and going to the maintenance side of it for my last few years. And they had guys that were dual. So you could go Little Bird and 60 qualled.
Okay.
And fly both, but for the maintenance side and stay current in both. But like you were asking, if you wanted to go to a different company and fill the easiest route would probably go to the 47s because, everybody's hurting on 47 pilots, regular Army, regiment, across the board. But you're pretty much going to seal your fate if you do that because, everybody tells me once you go to the 47 side, you're locked in for life. So,
yeah, because of the requirements.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. Well, what else? What else would you, for people who just don't know anything about any of this stuff, I mean, what other tidbits and cool guy stuff can you share about it?
I mean, I would say for the most part, don't believe everything you hear on social media, YouTube, all that stuff about the black helicopters are there to take your guns or to martial law or anything like that. It's a group of.
Did you get that a lot? I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up. Did you get that sort of like vibe a lot?
Yeah, I mean, especially when you went on these RMT trips, everybody thought you were there. There was one funny joke. I can't remember what city we were in, but we went. I don't know if it was Indiana or where it was, but we went up there. We were supposed to be there for a few days doing, training in the town. We come in and the first night we did the infills. Customers got off, and then they have sim rounds. People heard the sim rounds. And as we came in to land it and they heard those sim rounds, the city officials said that the water city and the pressure in the water system like dropped drastically within that first few minutes because everybody was dropping their dope. They're flushing their dope or something because they thought we were coming in to, round everybody up. But we were like, what? And, but we actually got canked for the rest of that training period. Like no more flights, so that's that kind of stuff that blew me away, that people would think that they're using the military to come in and just start rounding people up or I don't know what. So
yeah,
it's
an unfortunate sign of the times where we are politically.
It is, and it's always cracked me up. But
did anyone ever get shot at like during those training events that you know of?
Because
you say that, and I almost wouldn't be surprised if it happened.
Yeah, I mean, not that I'm aware of.
Right.
I know there's been a couple of guys there on the ground that said because they had a couple of targets that were in some sketchy neighborhoods.
Sure.
And you don't find out about it till you get there, and you're like, oh, didn't realize this was not such a good part of town.
Right.
And as far as I know, nobody's ever gotten hurt or ever got shot at while they were out there flying or anything like that. But I would think and the other thing I get asked a lot is, now that I'm out and guys ask is, as far as flying abilities, they were always like, well, what makes you a better pilot? And I was like, well, I don't think I'm a better pilot than anybody else. There's nothing, skill wise that's asked of most people, when they're doing this. And I said, you can go land on a rooftop. I said, you can go hover, by a bridge wing. I mean, there's linemen that go out there and, fly that aircraft next to power lines, and there's guys that get on and off it. That's how steady they are.
Yeah.
I said, it's all about, do you want to do the mission? Are you trainable? And, there is some risk involved, and are you willing to accept the risk of what you're doing? And, so the flying piece of it isn't that bad. It's not hard. It's everything else that's encompassed in the package,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's focus, right? I mean, I remember having these sort of discussions with, you remember the leadership that we had for a while there at 1st Squadron, 17th Cavalry, who were all Little Bird gun guys, and they like to talk a big game about stuff. And I remember saying like, well, if I was able to shoot multiple times a week, I'd be pretty good too. Right.
Yep.
Like it's not because you're so good. It's, well, you get to do it more, I remember Colonel Morgan saying one time to me, like, oh, I'm used to shooting a couple times a week. And I was like, sir, we're going to be lucky if we shoot, once or twice every 6 months, because we just don't have the ammo allocation. to do it.
Yeah.
And so there's something to be said for that exposure and experience. And what I always think is good about the special operations in general is a sort of, not to say that there isn't bullshit that you guys had to deal with, but I'm pretty sure you guys didn't have like clean sweep, and All American Week and, and all these parades and stuff that you had to also deal with. It's a little bit more focused on what you're trying to do. And that just by proxy is going to make you better at what you do because you get to do it all the time.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and that, and just like you said, it's, the mission there is it's exactly that. It's so focused on a particular thing that's all we train for.
Yeah. If all I had to do was land, I could land really good.
Yeah. I tell you what, I got more PowerPoint computer savvy than anything. So with all the planning that you have to do, but hey.
Yeah. Do you remember our first gunnery when Colonel Morgan was the commander at 117? And we went into like getting the brief for the gunnery, and there were giant butcher
products,
products wall to wall to wall all the way around. This is how everybody's going to line up for takeoff. This is how everyone's going to go. And we're like, we're just doing gunnery. Like, what are we doing?
Yep.
But that was your life.
But that's exactly it. So if you wanted to, as a training flight, you'd literally walk out with a packet, and you briefed a packet.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, and I shouldn't say every flight, as you progressed up in through your BMQ-ness, I'll call it, when you first got there, everything you did was briefed. And there's a reason for it. They want you to understand the SOPs, how things are done, everything else. And the only way you're going to do that is by repetitiveness, doing it over and over and over, keywords, key things.
Because that's the big lie, right? Is SOP. We're going to do this by SOP.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if you don't know what that is, there's no such thing as an SOP. And so by doing that, it almost seems counterintuitive or like against each other. Like, well, why are we briefing this if it's SOP? Well, we're briefing this so that you understand it, so that it is actually SOP.
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
So, and then, you do these trips, and I remember hearing this when we were in 58s about flying, like, oh yeah, you're going to brief and you're going to do all these packets and throw them away. And I'm like, surely it's not like that. Sure. There's just no way. And so one of my first trips, we planned for like a week, and you're staying there because nobody leaves your team, right? So if one guy's staying, still working, you're all staying, you're still working. So we make all these products, we check them, redundant checks, just going over, making sure they're all perfect. Everything looks great, all fantastic. And I think it was like the night before we were supposed to leave, they call up, hey, customers changed everything, we're going to be doing this. I mean, everything was literally just canned. And you're like, why do we do that? But you have to have something, you have to have something. So, but yeah, I was like, well, I just remember that flashing back in my head going, yeah, I guess it is. They weren't kidding. You do make all this stuff and plan all this out and then have it to be, just have it canned. So.
And then you just started thinking about how lazy you could be right now if you'd have just stayed as a 58 guy.
I know, right? I could be going home at lunch. We used to joke about that. Is you're sitting there, you're working and you're stuffing your face with a ho-ho or something, trying to stay awake. And you're like, man, just think we could have been home by now at lunch because we'd have been like, oh, we're not flying this afternoon? Nope. Okay, yeah, we're just going to go take a long lunch. And then you just go.
Yep, that's right.
So.
Well, it sounds like an interesting experience. And certainly, I appreciate what you're saying. Like, I'm not a better pilot, but you became a better pilot because of the exposure and the things that you got to do. And that's interesting to be able to push yourself to do those things. Because like you said, I mean, landing in very small confined areas, you probably remember here at Bragg, the C-130 Hulk trainer that we used to have to land at.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which that was a tight landing, that little parking lot or whatever. Mm-hmm. That's probably the tightest landings I've ever had to do. And, having only done it a couple times, but, you're having to do that and worse over and over and over and over again. So that's, it's definitely made you a better pilot, I'm sure, because you were a garbage pilot before.
Yeah.
Terrible. But I do remember that day you flew 10 hours because I was on that same mission. That's when we had to move whatever that brigade was. They were redeploying out of Mosul heading south.
Yeah, it's
because you were flying out of Spiker, I think.
Yep,
into Crit. Yeah, I think we handed the convoy off to you guys, and it was taking because I remember telling the talk that we were calling this Operation Clown Shoes because it was just taking so long, and they were just tripping over themselves trying to get out of Missoula. And then I know I flew a long day, but yeah, I remember talking to you sometime after that, and you were like, "Yeah, we flew 10 hours."
Yeah, those are
awful.
You know, and I think back too, it's funny is like when we had to fly, I don't remember what it was, 4 minimum 6 hours was our schedule or something like that.
Yeah.
And thinking how long that felt flying. And now my typical fly day is 4 hours. And I'm like, this ain't so bad, you know?
Yeah. It's hard to think that we consider those the good old days now, but
yeah, right. I don't know about the good old days. The old
the old days.
The old days.
Well, our spines weren't as compressed, and our necks weren't as jacked up as they are now, so
yeah,
we could take it longer. But
yeah, it's definitely definitely true. Definitely true. They yeah, I thought maybe too with this newer aircraft like these, A-Stars and stuff, that I'd be a lot more comfortable. And I don't know why it went in my head made me think I'd be wearing a Bose headset. Nope, still wearing a helmet.
Oh, really?
And the A-Star seating position's worse than a Little Bird or 58s.
Oh.
And it's like a vertical forward leaning position, and yeah, the seat back. Man, who designed the seat?
So. I need to, next time I'm anywhere near you, you need to come over, get on the 7.3. I'll put you in a cockpit, and then you can see how the chair lays back. I'll let you wear my headset, which probably weighs, 5 ounces. Yeah, we'll get you squared away.
Nice.
All right. Well, we'll shut it down there. I appreciate you taking your time out of your day to share your experiences and tell us a little bit about life in 1st Battalion. And it was good to catch up with you.
Yeah, you too, man.
Thanks for listening to the SOF series on Authentic.